Alright guys, so I'm sure you noticed it's Thursday, not Wednesday. I'm so sorry. So let me tell you a thing. I am so beyond frustrated. So I initially filmed on Tuesday and had everything done, ready to go. And on Wednesday I went to double check my editing, make sure everything was as I wanted it. And iMovie, the app that I use to edit, somehow glitched and lost my entire video, and I panicked, and it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon yesterday that I realized that I didn't have a video. So I set everything up as quickly as I could. I threw on some makeup. Brad got home. I made him put in headphones and disappear into the other room. Like I don't like him here when I film. And I refilmed the entire video yesterday, and I edited the entire thing, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm gonna make it, this is great. It was like 7 o'clock by the time I was finished with everything, and I'm trying to get it saved to upload it to YouTube, and iMovie glitched again. Yeah, I was not happy. It deleted both videos. Both of those videos are gone, disappeared into thin air somehow. I have no idea what happened. I was not happy. Okay, so that means this is the third time that I am filming the same exact video. So if my energy level seems off, if I don't seem as chipper as normal, it's because I'm frustrated as crap, because I've gone over this 3 times, and this is a really heavy subject. It's a possible serial killer, as you can tell by the title, The Redhead Murders. It's a possible serial killer, and it's very sad, heavy video, and now I'm filming it 3 times. I just want to be done. But let's just go ahead and jump into the video. Let's get this done so I don't have to talk about it again, okay? So this possible serial killer was active from as early as October 1978 through the mid-80s and possibly as late as 1992. Now the dates are really variable because the victims, while they do have a pattern, there is a pattern. They all have red hair, and they're all dumped on the side of a major highway or near a highway. But there's little tiny discrepancies, differences in each of these murders that it makes it really hard to pin it on just one person. It could be multiple people, it could be one person, but you can't really determine that because of the little differences, and we'll get into everything like that. These murders took place in the states of Tennessee, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Arkansas, and Kentucky. And like I said, they were all found on or near major highways, and they all had red hair. So the amount of victims is kind of variable. Some people think it's somewhere between 6 to 11 victims. Today we're going to be talking about 7 different victims, and unfortunately only 4 of those 7 victims were ever identified, 2 of which were actually identified in 2018. The first victim was found on February 13th of 1983 in Littleton, West Virginia in Wetzel County. Now she was found off of Route 250 by an elderly couple that was out for a drive. They saw what looked like a mannequin laying on the side of the road, and they wanted to get a better look and make sure that it wasn't a person. Fortunately, they did stop, check to make sure that it was a person, and they were able to call the police and get an investigation underway. Now, they were able to determine that this was only a body dump, and it had been a very recent dump because there was fresh snow on the ground, but the woman's body did not have any snow on top of her, only underneath her, and there were footprints and tire tracks in the snow near the body. So that means she was killed somewhere else and then recently dumped in this location. She was also found completely nude, but they did not find any outward signs of a sexual assault. That does not mean that she necessarily did not get sexually assaulted before her murder, but it just means they don't have any definitive proof of that happening. And she also died roughly 2 days before she was found. Due to the amount of decomposition, they were not able to determine her actual cause of death, though it is presumed to be strangulation. And she was also among the oldest of these victims, presumed to be between the ages of 35 and 45. She was also 5'6", about 130 pounds, with auburn hair, and assumed to have brown eyes, but due to decomposition, they weren't exactly sure. She also had 2 distinguishing scars on her body, one of which being a cesarean section scar, indicating that she had at least 1 child at the time of death. The other was just a little scar on one of her index fingers. She also was pretty much ruled out as a homeless person because her legs and underarms were freshly shaven, meaning she had access to a razor and as well as access to a shower or a bathtub. She was taking care of herself, so she most likely wasn't homeless, wasn't a hitchhiker, but she could have very well been a prostitute. There also was a possible suspect in this murder immediately because there was a suspicious male found wandering around the area that her body had been found, but he was never officially linked to this crime. There was no hard evidence saying that he did it. The second victim in this string of crimes was discovered on September 16th, 1984 in West Memphis in Arkansas along I-40. Now, her name was Lisa Nichols. She sometimes went by the last name of Jarvis as well, and she was 28 years old. They were able to identify her through her fingerprints fairly quickly, but they ran into a snag because they needed someone to actually identify the body, and this woman was unfortunately pretty estranged from her family, so they could not get into contact with her family for anyone to come down to identify her. Through some hard police work and some great jobs by the police department, they were able to find a couple that had let Nichols stay in their home with them in Florida temporarily, and they were able to come down and identify the body. But this did not happen for an entire 9 months. But believe it or not, she was the quickest body identified. Now, at the time of her murder, Lisa Nichols did have strawberry blonde hair, putting her into the redhead-ish category, and she also had been seen trying to solicit a ride from a truck stop, so most likely she was attempting to hitchhike and unfortunately got into the wrong man's truck. The next victim in this case was discovered on New Year's Day in 1985 in Jellicoe, Tennessee, off of I-75. She also was another redhead, short curly hair, freckles, and although she had only been murdered 3 days prior to the discovery of her body, she was already in an advanced state of decomposition. She also was a slight outlier in this case because she was the first victim to be found fully clothed. She was wearing a pullover and pants, fully clothed. She was not nude. So that's just one of the little tiny differences that make it really difficult to link all of these to one serial killer. Fortunately, on September 6th of 2018, they were able to positively identify this body as Tina Marie McKinney Farmer, and she had been reported missing by her family in 1984. She unfortunately was only 21 at the time of her murder, and she also was from Indiana, and she was last seen in Indianapolis accompanied by a trucker as they were heading towards Kentucky. The next victim was discovered on April 3rd of 1985. Now this was another slight outlier because number one, they were not able to determine her actual hair color because of the amount of decomposition. She was literally just bones by the time they found her, and she was not directly off of an interstate. She was some distance from I-75. She was found about 200 yards south of Big Wheel Gap Road, which was about 4 miles southwest of Jellicoe, Tennessee. She was believed to have died in 1981 to 1983, which would make her body about 1 to 4 years old by the time they found her. And like I said, they did only find a few bones. They were only able to collect 32 bones from the area. Thankfully, one of them was a skull, so they were able to create a full 3D replica of what she possibly would have looked like. Due to only being able to discover a few of the bones, they were unable to determine her cause of death, height, weight, hair color, eye color, any real identifying characteristics other than the possible 3D image of what she could have looked like. And unfortunately for her, she was also the youngest of the victims in this string of murders, believed to have been somewhere between 9 to 14 years old at the time of death. Now, on the body, they were able to find a necklace and a bracelet that were made out of buttons that you would find like on clothing, and they also found a pair of size 5 boots near the area, but they were unable to determine if these were the victim's boots or if they were just there by happenstance. Now, recent testing of this body determined that she was not a resident of the area or a native. She was actually born in either the Florida or South Texas area and had relocated to the Midwest, Rocky Mountain states, Southwest, or the Pacific coast. The next victim was found on March 31st of 1985. She was found in Pleasant View, Tennessee, which is in Cheatham County. Her cause of death was also unable to be determined because of the amount of decomposition to the body, but she was determined to have been dead for roughly 3 to 5 months before her discovery. She was also found on I-75 between the mile markers of 29 and 30. Unfortunately for her, she also was determined to have been about 2.5 to 5 months pregnant at the time of her death. She was between 5 foot and 5'2" with red hair as well. Her weight was unable to be determined due to the amount of decomposition, and they also found evidence that her teeth had a slight overbite and also some overcrowding. Her age was determined to be somewhere between 31 to 40 years old, making her also on the older side of the victims. The next victim was found on April 1st of 1985 off of Route 25, not directly off the highway though. This was another slight outlier. She was found a little bit off of the route in a dump. She was also found inside a white Admiral refrigerator with the decal with the words Superwoman on the front of the fridge. She was found in the town of Gray in Knox County, Kentucky. She had been dead for a few days before her discovery, and it was also unfortunately discovered that she had likely died by suffocation inside the fridge. She was also found nude, except for she was wearing 2 necklaces with very distinctive pendants on them. One had a heart pendant and the other necklace had a gold-colored eagle on it. She was also wearing 2 different pairs of socks. One was solid white and the other was white with green and yellow stripes. She also had a number of distinguishing features on her body, including a stained yellow upper incisor, moles on the right side of her neck, also near one ankle, and one mole underneath each breast. She also had some scars and marks on her abdomen, also indicating that she did have a C-section and had at least 1 child upon her death. She had possibly been trying to solicit a ride through CB radio in the area, trying to get to North Carolina, but that was not officially determined if it was her or not, but it does seem very possible because of who she ended up being, and we'll get to that in a second. The town of Gray was very shocked by the discovery of this body because Gray is a very small town where nothing ever happens. It's just a very calm and peaceful place. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens, so this discovery just really rocked them. And they decided to have a full funeral for this unidentified woman, and some 500 people showed up to pay their respects at this funeral, as well as the funeral being televised to try and keep the case in the limelight, let people know that this is what's going on, as well as allow people to pay their respects even if they could not be there in person. This case was publicized again in 2013, and with this new publication came a lot of new tips and information flooding into the area, people trying to determine who this woman was, and it turns out one of these tips ended up leading to the positive identification of this body. In 2018, they were able to officially announce that this woman's name was Epsie Regina Black Pilgrim. Her daughter was actually the one that called in with the tip, saying she recognized the description of the woman as well as the two necklaces that she had been wearing, and she was a native of North Carolina, which again, like I said earlier, she was trying to possibly solicit a ride through CB radio, trying to get to North Carolina. So it really seems like she was trying to go home, and that just makes this case just, it's already sad, but I feel like that makes it even more sad. She was trying to go home, and obviously by now you've probably picked up there's a possible trucker connection, obviously, with CB radio and people hitchhiking from truck stops, but we'll get to that in a minute. The last victim that we're going to be talking about in this video, at least, not talking about the outliers and other possibilities in the case, these are just the main women that they think were connected. This woman was discovered April 14th of 1985 in Greenville, Tennessee, which is in Greene County. She also was another slight outlier because unlike the others who died to either suffocation, asphyxiation, strangulation, something like that, this woman actually died from blunt force trauma to the head as well as a stab wound to the abdomen. She also was discovered roughly 3 to 6 weeks after her death. She also was on the younger side of victims, believing to have been between 14 to 20 years old, possibly as old as 25. They later positively ID'd her. She was actually 17 to 18 at the time of her death. Now, she also, unfortunately, had been roughly 6 to 8 weeks pregnant, but had miscarried shortly before her murder, which also honestly kind of makes me curious if this actually fits in with the case, because it seems like this was more of a case of rage, and maybe if she had lost a man's baby through miscarriage, you know, not actually her fault. Obviously, miscarriages happen every day, but maybe somebody was very angry that she miscarried and maybe they beat her and stabbed her because she was stabbed in the abdomen. I don't know. This one doesn't quite fit for me, but it's in the list of possible suspects, so I put it in there, but I'm not personally convinced, but I'll let you guys tell me, do you think that it was the serial killer, or do you think that this was another unrelated murder? She also had light brown to blonde hair with red streaks at the time of her death, which is the connection to the Redhead murder, also her being in the general area. They did take her fingerprints, dental records, and molds, as well as her DNA, and thankfully they did that because they were able to get a positive identification on who she was very recently, actually in November of 2018. A young woman named Elizabeth Lamotte, or Lamotte, I'm so sorry, I'm really bad with pronunciation of names, but she went by Liz, and she was about 17 when she went missing from a youth development center in New Hampshire, in Manchester. When she went missing, the youth development center did not report her missing, and I'm assuming it's because she was 17 at the time and they knew that she was about to age out of their system. Maybe they just didn't care, unfortunately. In 2017, 2 of her brothers decided to finally officially report her as missing after not having any contact since roughly 1985. One of the brothers ended up giving a sample of his DNA to have tested against this victim, and it came back as a positive identification that this was in fact his sister, unfortunately, but at least they know where she was now. Now, unfortunately, with cases like this is another reason why so many of these women that are found on the sides of highways are not positively identified, because a lot of the time they're never even reported missing for decades, or maybe never, which makes it absolutely impossible for the police to even get a lead on who possibly it could have been. And that's the real issue with these cases. It's just really sad that these are women who are really just victims of their circumstance. It's just so sad. In 1985, shortly after the discovery of the girl in Greenville, the states of Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Arkansas, and Mississippi all decided to contact the FBI to get their help with this case and try and connect it to a single killer. I know you noticed the light just changed, I'm sorry. I film in front of a giant window and it's partially cloudy today and the light's it just keeps changing. I'm so sorry. 21 officials met at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's head office, which is in Nashville, Tennessee, to compare notes on 8 possible victims of this possible serial killer. They wanted to determine if it was the work of one killer or multiple. They met for 6 hours, and unfortunately they didn't come to a conclusion because there's so many little tiny changes and differences that, yeah, it basically shows a pattern, but usually killers show a very distinctive pattern. They die in the exact same, like they murder in the exact same way, and they dispose of the body in the exact same way, and there's just little tiny discrepancies all over the place. Like some had been sexually assaulted shortly before their deaths, some had not, some were wearing clothes, some were not, some were dumped right on the side of a main highway, others were well off the highway. It's just nearly impossible to determine if this is an actual serial killer or if it's just a string of unfortunate murders. There were also 4 victims in Texas and 1 victim in Ohio, nicknamed the Buckskin Girl. Luckily, they have identified her body at this time. They thought initially they could be connected to this murderer as well, but they ended up getting ruled out, and they had been determined they were killed by somebody else, not connected to this possible serial killer. So, like I said, they did pick up on the trucker connection. It really seemed like it was somebody who traveled vast distances very frequently, mainly on main highways. Therefore, they really determined it was a possible trucker that was doing this. It also seemed like they were picking up women who were either homeless, hitchhiking, transients, or prostitutes. The first suspect that they really began to question was a man named Jerry Leon Johns. He became a suspect after, in 1985, he met a woman by the name of Linda Shack. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that. Anyway, he met her where she was working at the Catch One bar, and she decided to go back with him to his hotel room. Once they got to the hotel room, Johns pulled a gun on her and said that he was a narcotics officer with the Texas Rangers and ordered her to come with him, and he began driving her. Once they got to Knoxville, Tennessee, I guess he decided that that was far enough, and he ripped a piece of her shirt and tied it around her neck, tied a big knot in it, and attempted to strangle her to death. Once he determined that she was dead, he dumped her body in a storm drain along I-40 in Knoxville and left her for dead. Luckily, Linda did not die in this attack. She managed to be able to get up, get to the police, and she gave them a good enough description that they were able to track him down very quickly and get him into custody. Once they brought him into custody, Detective Larry Johnson told the News-Sentinel, which is a news source in Knoxville, Tennessee, he said that the words serial killer were about the 3rd thing out of this guy's mouth. Now, if that isn't sketch, I don't know what is. I mean, they hadn't even begun questioning him on any other victims, and he just threw out there, oh yeah, serial killers. Like, what? Why is he talking about serial killers all of a sudden? And then he went on to even elaborate, saying he's very fascinated by the psychology behind serial killers, and he wanted to know how they got to the point where they're killing multiple people. What? Why is he talking about serial killers all of a sudden? Now, because of this, they began questioning him on connection to roughly 20 cases of women found on the side of the roads murdered, in multiple states: Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Indiana, just states everywhere. There were more. They were just questioning him on every single woman that was found dead on the side of the road. They also thought that he had a connection to the Redhead Murders because the knot that was found in the piece of cloth that he used to try and strangle Linda Shack with was very, very similar to a knot that was found near one of the Redhead murder victims. Now, Johns also gave an interview from his cell in jail to the News-Sentinel where he said, quote, "Apparently, I fit the mold of what they're looking for. You can't blame them. They've got a lot of unsolved cases all over the country, but they can try all they want. It won't work. I didn't do it." Now, less than a month after his arrest, they did discover the woman who ended up being ID'd later as Black Pilgrim, the girl that was found in the refrigerator. And since she had only been dead for a couple of days and they had tied her to the Redhead Murders, Johns was officially ruled out as one of the Redhead murder suspects. They also found the girl in Greenville not long after that, and the testing determined that she had also been murdered while Johns was in custody. So most likely he was not connected to this string of murders, but just because of that doesn't mean that he did not face justice for what he did to Linda. He did end up going to jail on the counts of kidnapping and assault, and he ended up dying in prison in 2010. There was another truck driver who was questioned with a possible link to these murders, Thomas Lee Elkins. He had kidnapped a 20-year-old redheaded woman and was keeping her in the cab of his truck, where he was raping her repeatedly and driving her around. Fortunately, she was able to make her escape while he was sleeping one night, but he ended up also being ruled out as a suspect in the Redhead murders as well. Like I said, these cases were extremely difficult to find possible suspects because this was not a rare thing, unfortunately. Just truckers taking advantage of women and dumping them on the side of the road, it's not as rare as you would hope. Just to give an example of more recent times where this is still happening, there was a trucker that was arrested in 2007 in connection to the murder of a young woman. His name was Bruce D. Mendenhall, and he was arrested in connection to the murder of a girl named Sarah Nicole Hulbert, who was 25 at the time of her death. Prosecutors would later describe the cab of his truck as a, quote, killing chamber. They found a lot of stuff in the cab of his truck, including a rifle, a nightstick, tape, handcuffs, latex gloves, sex toys, as well as a bag of clothes that were soaked in blood. Now, the police had this sent off to have the DNA tested, and it came back positive for 5 different women's DNA. So this guy was another serial killer, unfortunately, and he was a trucker taking advantage of women who were hitchhiking or homeless or prostitutes. And like I said, this was more recent. He was arrested in 2007. He is now 67 years old and serving 2 life sentences, one for the murder of Hulbert as well as for the murder of another woman who was found nude and dumped in a garbage can in Lebanon, Tennessee. He is also the suspect in 2 other homicides, and he is awaiting trial for 2 other murders as well. This guy is a real piece of work. Now, highway killings are so common that the FBI has launched a national database called the Highway Killings Initiative that has over 750 unsolved cases of women found on the sides of highways. It also has about 450 possible suspects linked to these cases, but there is no hard evidence linking them enough to get them arrested. So, getting back to the Redhead murders, there was a personality profile made for this possible serial killer, and it actually came from the most unlikely of places. In 2018, a sociology class at Elizabethton High School in Elizabethton, Tennessee, with the help of their teacher, Alex Campbell, began looking into this string of murders, trying to see if they could find connections to prove it was indeed a serial killer, as well as developing a personality profile that could be used to help bring him to justice. Now, this class actually ended up coining the term the Bible-belt Strangler, which to me, I know this is highly inappropriate, but I have to get it out there. It sounds like these kids watched SpongeBob and knew of the Tattletale Strangler and then like worked off of that for this name. That's just me, I'm sorry. I know that's like highly inappropriate, but it made me laugh. So they also determined that he had been born between the years of 1936 and 1962, making him roughly between the ages of 24 and 49 at the time of these murders. They also determined that he was roughly 5'9" to 6'2", about 180 to 270 pounds of athletic build, and he was also a white male who operated as a trucker based in Knoxville, Tennessee. And the creepiest part about all of it is they think that this man is still alive and well, living in the Knoxville, Tennessee area. So all my redheads in Knoxville, please be careful. Now this class actually ended up getting this personality profile to an actual FBI profile who ended up validating and confirming that this was a very accurate representation, and they ended up taking it to the police, and the police are currently using this personality profile to look further into this case, which, good job. Like, that is the coolest thing. These high school students were so accurate that it brought attention to this case decades later. That is absolutely incredible, and the students and the teacher should be incredibly proud of themselves. They also believed that the murders only stopped because this man stopped being a truck driver for one reason or another. That's why they think that he is still alive. They think that he just had a change of employment, or he couldn't drive anymore or something, but they do believe that he is still alive. So what do you guys think? Do you think that this is the work of a serial killer, the Bible-belt Strangler, or do you think that it's just a very unfortunate pattern that emerged from the murders of multiple different women by multiple different killers? Now, it's an absolute tragedy that there are so many victims, not only in this case, but just women who are taken advantage of because of their circumstances, murdered and left on the side of the road to die, that are still unidentified to this day. There are so many of these women that have never been identified because they were either homeless or just hitchhikers or prostitutes, and people either didn't notice that they went missing or they just didn't have anyone who cared that they went missing. That is so sad. Part of the reason that I did start this series on this channel and really focus on unsolved cases and not the bigger ones is because I feel like we can't let these cases die. We need to keep these cases in the limelight, keep people thinking about them, keep people researching them. Maybe people will continue to find connections like the class getting this information to the police and the police actually reopening the case and re-looking into it, or the families that found their mother, Black Pilgrim, or they found their sister years later. These women that were murdered deserve to be found, to be identified. They deserve to have their murderer caught and brought to justice. And I just feel like if I can do anything, my little tiny YouTube channel that has 40 subscribers could at least help a little bit. And I encourage everybody who watches my channel, do your own research. I am not an expert. I just get my information online just like you would. I don't have access to court cases or police records or anything like that, so I encourage you, please look it up yourself. I'm also the victim of bias. Everybody is. I want everyone to look it up themselves. Get back to me. Let me know, what do you think of this case? So y'all, please, please, please stay safe out there. Keep your head on a swivel. Don't hitchhike. We got Uber and Lyft now, y'all. We don't need to hitchhike. Like, please don't put yourself in that kind of danger. And I will see you next week for another case. See you then.